SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. How contemporary or antiquated is your workplace culture? Workers' expectations have evolved dramatically in recent years, and leaders need to change their practices to keep pace. Workplace culture specialist and author of Detox Your Culture, Colin Ellis, says investing in effective modern management is key. Colin offers some strategies to future-proof your workplace, but what does he mean when he describes some of the workplace practices as old-fashioned? He begins by telling Jeff Waters.
Old-fashioned cultures, Jeff, are those that are yet to evolve to meet the time that we are living in right now. So often old-fashioned cultures, and it depends on the employee mix, but certainly if you've got some younger employees, they'll perceive comments as sexist, actions as misogynistic. Certainly things that managers need to be aware of is things like misgendering, all of these kinds of things, and they'll make derogatory comments without consciously thinking about it. Kind of all this, one organization I worked with, all this Me Too stuff, without recognizing just how important that particular movement was and remains to this day in transforming workplace cultures and the safety for females. So old-fashioned cultures are those really that have yet to move with the times, and the senior leaders that preside over them are largely out of touch with the way that work gets done.
Is it just me, or has this culture sped up and the change is greater now than it has been in previous generations? Or is that just something that every generation thinks?
No. It's definitely sped up. So the first acceleration we saw was post-global financial crisis. Nobody was talking about culture. Jeff, I'm in my mid-50s, I'm 55. We never meant, the word culture never crossed anybody's lips. We talked about teamwork and we talked about performance and we talked about standards, but we never talked about culture. There was never a sense of agreement. Nobody talked about psychological safety. We always talked about physical safety. So that started around about 2008, 2009, 2010. We started talking about creating the kind of workplaces that generated trust and empowerment. Now, prior to that, it was still the best cultures that delivered results, but we just didn't talk about it in that way. In the last 5-6 years, and I include COVID in that, COVID really accelerated where work gets done, rather than how work gets done. But really from 2017, 18, we've started finally to acknowledge the cognitive and the gender differences in the workplace. Now, where people have struggled, Jeff, is that they feel that the pendulum has swung too far one way. And so this is, we see this in the world right now. We've got these real extreme left and extreme right reviews. It's even permeated into our politics as well. And so people feel, and they will say things like, oh, we've gone too far, without recognizing that actually to create a movement, we need to really challenge the status quo. So we do need to go far in order to educate people, or for them to educate themselves, in order to come back to a central position, which is where everybody is happiest, where we generate the most respect, the most trust. And so I still think we're in that pendulum swing at the minute, Jeff, and I don't feel enough organizations are educating their managers in the right way. And so what I still see is diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, which are great at educating managers, but that's seen as the answer, the final answer. That's seen as, if we do that, we'll have fixed everything else, rather than, hey, that's just one part of the puzzle. We also need to look at behavior. We also need to look at communication. We also need to look at generational differences and the upbringing children have and the expectations that they have. We also need to look at technology and how we use technology. There are still some people who are clinging on to old spreadsheets and the old ways of doing things. It's the same with hybrid work. There isn't this expectation that the world has fundamentally shifted. And I'm not saying hybrid work's the right thing for every organisation. In person is still the best way to do some things, Jeff. But it has accelerated over the last 5 years, even more so since COVID. But it's incumbent upon leaders to keep up rather than to deny.
How do I do that as a leader? I mean, where do I seek help in this?
Yeah, and it's a question that many people don't ask themselves, Jeff, to be perfectly honest with you. There's just an expectation, I think, sometimes that the status quo will just maintain itself, and it really won't. So the average tenure for millennial and Gen Z employees is just over 2 years for cultures that they don't want to be a part of. Now, we know, because we've got experience, that actually the best results come from loyal employees, people who've been there 5 years plus. And so this is and Gen Z and millennials who've been involved in the definition of culture and can see the positive evolution of culture, they stay for over 5 years. So what senior leaders need to do is invest in contemporary management programs for their managers. Now, this means taking time out of the business, educating their managers, and almost, kind of losing some time, but they will gain it all back in the productivity of culture. In the past, we used to see this as a real drain on time, and training courses were the first things to go when money was tight. But now employees are looking at that and saying, well, if you're going to take away that money, or if you're not going to educate me on the kind of manager that I need to be, then I don't want to be at this organization. And they'll find the organizations that do invest that time. And some of the best organizations in the world are some of the smallest family businesses. And they invest time, thought, money, effort into educating their managers on how to be managers. And they involve their employees in defining the culture such that all employees feel a sense of belonging. They want to perform for it. They want to be productive. They want to be engaged. They want to do the right thing. And then they contribute to its positive evolution. So it's win-win for managers who see that investing in management skills and involving people in defining culture is the way forward in 2024 and beyond.
What would you say to listeners who might be of a certain age and are a bit resentful of all of this change and the expectations of workers that they see as unreasonable because, after all, you are paying this worker to do a job? What would you say to people like that or who have that attitude?
Well, listen, I have empathy for it, Jeff. I think somebody asked me not so long ago, what's the hardest part of my job? And the hardest part of my job is personal evolution. Like I mentioned, I'm in my mid-50s now, and the world that I work in now is considerably different than the world I started working in when I was 17. When I first started working 17 in a small industrial town in northwest England, everybody drank all of the time, lunchtime, evenings. It was that. And so kind of for me to educate myself has been one of the hardest things. So I have some empathy, but they really don't have a choice. And so this is the hardest part for senior leaders to understand, is that because work has fundamentally shifted so far, they really do need to keep up. Now, it's not as bad as it sounds. Just with a few, reading some well-placed articles, reading the book, I wrote about this in Detox Your Culture. I wrote about the behaviors that are expected in 2024 and beyond. Just with a small amount of education, a little bit of bite in the tongue, a little bit of keeping the emotions in check, personal evolution is possible. But there has to be this recognition that if you don't change and you don't evolve, then you could be that person on the front of the paper. And that's the last thing anybody wants.
That was workplace culture specialist and author Colin D. Ellis. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel.